You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates. I hope you guys had a wonderful day yesterday. Today is May 28th, 2020, and we are bringing you another daily podcast. We are #1 on Google Podcasts for Toronto real estate. Thanks, guys, for all our listeners. Just yesterday, we once again broke our daily download record, and we're getting wonderful feedback from people that are listening, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you guys every day. I hope you guys have learned some new stuff. And I'm excited to be here again today with some great content, and we're going to be diving really deep today into this feud going on between landlords and tenants on both the residential and the commercial side. Just reading some of the news articles from this morning, I've learned some cool stuff too, and I want to share them with you. We're going to start off talking about how COVID is impacting both the landlords and the renters, and they are leaving the landlords to pay hairy fines. You're not going to believe this, guys. There's a paralegal suing a landlord, and his name is Harry Fines. Let's go. Then we're going to go dive into the commercial side. We're going to talk about why commercial landlords are refusing the new rent relief program. We've kind of been talking in past podcasts about how this rent relief program hasn't really worked and they haven't grabbed onto it. Now I'm starting to see articles popping up talking about why they're not grabbing onto it. And so we can kind of talk about some of the holes there. And then, will evicting tenants post-COVID become easier? The NDP would say that it does. So I want to jump into an article they're publishing because apparently our little sneaky Rob Ford is trying to pull a fast one here in Ontario. So before I kind of jump into those categories, I like to add some real estate insight and what's kind of been going on. And I saw this Toronto Real Estate Signs is now the time to buy podcast from the Star, but there was nothing new under that rock. I've been running around looking with clients, and at least in the low rise in and around Toronto, it is crazy. I'm finding a lot more people are starting to price stuff for multiple offers and bidding wars. Just yesterday, we were considering looking at a property, but before we even got in there, they had 11 registered offers. So we kind of said, screw it, we're going to look at other stuff. But there is a lot of activity, a lot of confidence coming back to the sellers, a lot of confidence coming to the agents who have sales and listings. And so watch out, guys. I think you're going to be in for a surprise when it comes to especially the second half of May when the figures come out in the coming weeks. And we'll be covering that as well, keeping you in the loop, as we always do. Here we go. Let's start talking about landlords and renters. We get a lot of landlords and investors following us on our channel, and thank you guys for tuning in. And people who aren't are generally interested in knowing what landlords or people who invest in real estate are doing or how they think. So it's a really applicable content for everybody, and just kind of wrapping our head around this situation. We're going to see the angle of the landlords. We're going to see the angle of the renters. And I want you guys to make the decision on who do you think has power in this power struggle currently. So what this story was, this came from the Globe and Mail. Actually, a really cool article. It broke down 3 stories. I'm going to kind of share with you the highlights of each of them. And it talks about what kind of pickle they're all in, because they're all kind of facing unique things. So as restrictions on evictions during the novel, it's like a book. We're reading about the coronavirus pandemic, extend into their 3rd month. I probably sound like a complete moron to people in the health sciences sector. I'm sorry. It's a novel. We're reading a novel. Some Ontario homebuyers and sellers are discovering renters have incredible leverage over the fate of transactions, and some are willing to wield it. Here we go. Story number 1. So Tina Walker attempted to close a deal to sell a triplex she bought in 2014. So she had 3 tenants, okay? 2 of them left, but one of them notified her that she wouldn't be leaving, and they asked her to compensate them, if she was going to leave, $60,000 before he leaves. And then this is what she said. It's extortion. Extortion is what it is, which is true. He feels insulted by the offer, which almost would repay the tenant for the last 5 years of rent. So imagine that. Like, you want to close your house. You've already sold it. You've promised to give vacant possession. And now, which you're going to get sued, and you're liable if you can't. And this person on the other side is saying, you owe me $60,000. And meanwhile, the Ontario Residential Tenancies Act provides a form of no-fault eviction during a home sale transaction normally, but the selling landlord then would need to file N12 applications to the landlord-tenant board to evict. But here's the thing. Listen to this timing. She had a hearing scheduled for March 17th, but on March 16th, the day before, the LTB canceled all in-person hearings. So this is the worst possible scenario for this person, this landlord, kind of caught. In addition, maybe she's in addiction, I don't know. Let's not put words there, though. In addition, by order of Ontario Superior Court of Justice, any pending eviction orders will not be enforced by the Ministry of the Attorney General's Sheriff's Office unless ordered otherwise by the court for the duration of the pandemic response. How about that? That's the first story. Like, you know how you kind of read like these Disney stories and there's always a happily ever after? There is zero happily ever after in that story. That sucks. Okay, let's move on to story number 2. Because maybe in this story there's a little bit of a success story because this comes from the perspective of the tenant. And it introduces my good friend, who I don't know, Mr. Harry Fine, a paralegal and former LTB adjudicator. What a name. Mr. Fine says that while the ability to delay a transaction closing was always present in the tenant-landlord relations with no evictions, the tenants now have even more leverage. Oh, and he knows it, and he's taken advantage of it. Harry Fine, and that name, by the way, that's who I want collecting money for me, right? Like if you were going to go chase somebody, like if you were to hire the top prosecutor of Toronto or of Ontario or wherever they run out of, I guess the province, in this case, that's the guy I want. Don't worry, I'll leave it to my boy Harry Fine. He's got him. So this is a quote for him. I'm dealing with a guy, all his life he worked in event planning and production. Now there are no events. First time in his life he feels like he could be out in the streets with his daughter. I said if you forgive his rent for April, May, June, July and pay $20,000, he will make sure your real estate goes through. Working on behalf of the tenant. This guy, you want to know where extortion's coming from. It's coming from Harry Fine. The landlord emails me back saying, that's extortion. No, it's not. There's a process. It's not my client's fault the LTB shut down. You don't have to make the deal. If you won't work with my client at all about rent, he has no choice, and your real estate deal is not going to close in July. Got you lovingly by the balls, Mr. Fine. That's his signature. That's my guess. That's my signature for him, in my mind. Anyways. Story 2, happy ending for that guy. $20,000 sounds good. Hire Harry Fines if you're a tenant. This is looking really bad for the landlord so far. Let's see if story number 3 saves the day. Yulia Belina has experienced this process from the buyer's side, and her family was essentially homeless for a month in April as a consequence. So now this is from the perspective of a buyer of a property who has a tenant that won't leave. 6-month closing time, that's the closing, which had a clause for vacant possession, as most do, especially if there's a tenant and we need to have them removed. You always put that in there. A week before closing, the tenants refused to allow their inspector entry for the final visit and also asked for a 2-week extension before moving out. Uh-oh. This is always step 1. Tenants don't always just screw you. They kind of like, they test you out and you get like, there's kind of writing on the wall. That's why some landlords can be real sticklers because they know that this happens if they've got past experience. They took possession with the tenant's status unresolved. With the tenant refusing to move, they moved in with their husband's parents. So they bought the house. It wasn't vacant possession. They said, okay, fine, we'll take the deal. And then they couldn't move in because the tenant didn't leave. And then they found out after the tenant had refused a $10,000 cash offer from the previous landlord. So it came up after the fact that they didn't even want 10 grand. In early May, the situation resolved with the tenant moving out on her own after her roommate also left. Miss Belina now plans to move in June 1st. Oh, thank God we got a happy ending. This person finally left. And I like to think that they didn't get any money out of the hands, but who knows. And her husband, this person that's now moving in, was laid off because of the pandemic, and they're going to complete some renovations. In the end, the ordeal cost the couple several $1,000s extras in fees for closing and obviously moving twice. And here's the moral of the story. At present, the N12 for transactions do not qualify for emergency hearing treatment. So if you're trying to evict, they don't hear for an emergency hearing treatment, of course, because there's tens of thousands of these suckers piling up. And we've talked about this in past podcasts. This could be a big, just like, it's almost like this vision I get is this idea of this kind of canal that's piling up all this water, right? It's like at the top of this dam. And when that dam breaks, if it ever breaks, I mean, here's the question, will it ever break? At some point, and once it breaks, here comes all the evictions. During this very challenging time, we are encouraging landlords and tenants to work together and to speak to one another and to come to arrangements that will ensure all individuals and families have a place to stay at this time while putting their health and the health of all Ontarians first. Well, that's cute. That's our medical officer of health. That's fine. All right. These are the stories going on behind the scenes that come behind these cute little quotes that make you sound all great. Tenants aren't stupid. Here's my friend, Mr. Harry Fine. Leave him the floor. You get the last word here, man. What do you want to say? Tenants aren't stupid. It's the only business in the world I know of where the customer knows more about the business than the business operator. Well, let's hope this podcast can change the cards a little bit for some of you landlords out there. These tenants, especially the ones that are expecting $60,000 in fines, they're not stupid. They know the rules, and the rules are heavily against you guys right now. These are a few stories of what's been going on, and that sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? So how about we try applying that to the commercial landlords? Right? Like, this is working so well for our residential friends. Why not try and bring this over to the commercial space? Well, that's been the threat that we've seen pretty much from the Ontario government and from the municipal governments calling out for that. And we've seen other provinces apply that already. But then we've got this other thing going on right now, the rent relief program. And if they don't take on to that, then that's when we risk this risk of, oh, wow, throwing risks out here. It's a risky world out there. This is where there's a threat of having the inability to evict, right? But then the question is, well, knowing that there's these threats happening, why wouldn't you just accept this rent relief program? And we know a lot of them are not. We've talked about this in past podcasts, but I'm seeing articles now talking about why they're not. And these are business decisions, and it's their business. They have the right to make that decision. So the only way you're going to be able to force their hand is if you strong arm them with making a ruling where you can't evict. Right? That's kind of why that's been the threat. But here are some of the reasons why. Property owners were able to apply Wednesday to the CECRA program, this is the commercial rent assistance, which assures landlords they will get 75% of their rent on commercial spaces as many businesses have closed and are hurting due to reduced traffic during the coronavirus pandemic. But some landlords are giving the program a cool reception. Here's reason number one. It's too complex to manage. It requires the tenant have a 70% decline in revenue. So they're saying it's too difficult. Reason number two, it's a steep price. The landlords must absorb 25% of the rent. They're saying they're still taking a 25% cut. And by some people's measurements, that's a lot of money. Some members have mixed feelings whether it's worth it or not. It seems complicated as to who pays and who qualifies, but we will have some properties apply to see how it works. So these are like kind of the big landlords just trying it out. In fact, this is the guy this guy's from London Development Institute. Actually, this article, by the way, is part of the London Free Press. That's where this article is from. It sounds reasonable on paper, but the bureaucracy makes it restrictive. There you go. Then reason number 4 is the risk. We are seeing that things are fluid, and what if in a few weeks the market picks up and is open again? Why would a landlord take the risk of losing 25% if business is operating again in a few weeks? Something to think about. Reason number 5, acceptance of this program also depends on what kind of commercial renters a landlord has. And then they go on to talk about there's vast differences between commercial businesses in general, but some businesses are more impacted than others. For example, retail and restaurant sectors have been hit hard and need help, but office-based businesses are largely still working, albeit from home, and the industrial sector is essential. So rental income is still flowing in those sectors. So you can see, even in the rental space, you can't treat them all exactly the same because some are struggling, and it seems though the retail and restaurants are a little more open to this. But if you're in the office business, like, what do you care? Like, your tenants should be able to pay. If they're not, then you got to ask some serious questions. And the last and final concern I'm getting from this article, and I think it's a good one, another concern for landlords is that their bank has been involved, and businesses may not want to send a message to their financial institution they have revenue problems. This whole idea of privacy, right? Like, we don't want to divulge our books. We don't want to trigger anyone off because you've got a problem and now all of a sudden you're going to pull our financing or screw us over. I don't think so. So these are the reasons that are kind of behind the veil, if you will, and hopefully you're seeing a few of them. I'm sure there's more, right? I'm sure there's more case by case. And then they said here, it's like telling your bank I'm on the ropes and I'm almost done, right? Like, it's true. Like, if you're kind of desperate, then pull this. By being in a position of, I don't need your rent, to stand before the bank, you seem really strong, right? And just all this keeping in mind, this is in the short term. And so do you really want to dampen those things? It's some very good points. And my thinking is they don't need any points. Like they're given reasons because we're kind of wondering why. They've taken a step to give some reasons, but they never had to. That's their business, right? Like that's not like if you can't pay my business, that's your problem. But my problem is my business and I'm going to run it how I want. And so this is where the evictions can become a real challenge. And hey, if we want to see what we're seeing on the residential side and the commercial side, so we're talking tenfold, we're talking way more money and way bigger players, then sure, go ahead. Set up that restriction on, anyways. Whew. Winding down here. Whew. Shake it off, Brad. Shake it off. Okay. Whew. Sorry, getting it back again. All right, so let's talk about a few other articles. I'd like to give some of the highlights before we kind of jump into our final point here. There was an extension of the emergency orders until June 9th. You probably heard about that. So currently there's a ban on social gatherings of 5 people. So things are remaining unchanged until June 9th. Also, Toronto has actually released information on where the geographical spread has been. We actually talked about this yesterday. So this is great. Great response by the government. They're sharing the hotspots because you can't just say there's a bunch of issues and there's specific hotspots, but then not tell anybody where they are. So I'm happy to see that they've posted it. And if you're in Toronto, go ahead and check the geographic areas. You can actually look online and see how hard hit, how hot a spot is your area that you live. And then I found another article that kind of highlighted CMHC, and I read that article. It's called Housing Market Will Feel Effect of COVID-19 Until 2022, CMHC says. Now, we've talked about what CMHC has said, but one more point that I got out of this article I just wanted to kind of throw at you before we jump to the next one. Your little hot potato. Construction of new homes is expected to slow to a crawl. CMHC is forecasting that housing starts could plummet by as much as, drumroll please, my 2-year-old loves that. I'm sure you guys don't care. Why do people love the drum roll? Like, what's with the drum roll? Anyways, you got one here. Except I did it on my couch, so you probably didn't even hear it. 75% plummet in construction. That's a huge number. While home sales would likely fall by 29%. That's not such a huge number, but at least relative to what we've seen locally. But what this is kind of, we were talking about this kind of conversation I had with Mayor Crombie, and we asked her the question about builders, and she was very confident. Oh yeah, builders moving forward. We got everything online. They could submit online. No problem. Everything's moving good. But when I talk to builders, they seem a little bit more hesitant. They don't seem as confident that things are going to kind of fly through. So this tells me, based on what CMHC is saying, that it seems more in line with what the builders have been saying than what the mayors are saying. But of course, the mayors are trying to keep an image, and that's fine too. So let's go and talk about this last thing. We're going a little political here because this is jumping on to the NDP website. You know there's only a problem here when you get the NDP criticizing Doug Ford. This is a galactic battle right now. Ford attempts to quietly sneak through bill to make it easier for landlords to evict tenants. We are going super heavy on the landlord-tenant thing today, but this is important. And so if you don't like it, why are you still here? I'm going to share the news that's coming out. And if the news is landlord-tenant related, I'm going to talk about it. And this is a big conflict, and we're kind of nearing a new month. So hopefully this is applicable to everybody. I think it's good stuff. So Susie Morrison, an Ontario NDP tenant rights critic, said it's simply wrong for Doug Ford to capitalize on a pandemic to quietly ram through legislation that will make it easier for landlords to evict tenants. Does that sound like any political person ever? Like cramming through something during a crisis? Oh my goodness, this is everybody, right? I guess the question is what is it? So on Bill 184, called the Protecting, this is very ironic, called Protecting Tenants and Strengthening Community Housing Act. And then they call them out on it. They said it literally does the opposite of what the name suggests, right? Because they're protecting tenants. I guess the question is what protects tenants? And this comes back down to the political side, like on the left or the right, who is ultimately protecting tenants? Both sides would argue their side protects tenants, but obviously the NDPs are sitting from the left side, so in this case it doesn't. The bill prevents tenants from bringing up issues like their landlord failing to make repairs to their unit during hearings for non-payment of rent, and skips straight from repayment agreements for back rent to eviction orders without any hearing for the tenant if they miss a payment. So what I hear here is a couple things. One, now I haven't read the bill. I don't have time to read Bill 184, so I'm just kind of taking their word as gospel here, which is a scary thing given it's a political party's speech. But if what I'm reading here is correct, it sounds as though that the hearings for non-payment, when that's going on, so you didn't pay rent, So now you can't turn around and say, oh, well, he didn't repair my fridge when it broke down because you didn't pay rent. That's what I hear there. And then the final thing here is that if you haven't paid rent, you can pretty much jump straight to a repayment agreement if you haven't been paying rent. So in other words, on the tail end of all of this, if you've been skipping your rent, this enforces the point that you've been screwing the landlord. So stop screwing the landlord, because on the tail end of this thing, we're going to have an opportunity for you to jump straight to hearing and you to get kicked out and evicted and to collect the rent you did not pay. So maybe there's a balance here, right? Like this, I mean, it doesn't sound fun to the tenant, but hopefully, given some of the stories we've seen, there's definitely some kind of need here. We can't just keep this process taking forever to kick someone out that's refusing to pay. You know, when the crisis is over, obviously, when the crisis is going on, all bets are off. It was always wrong for the Ford government to attempt to make evictions easier. And it's even worse to use the pandemic as a cover to sneak through changes that will hurt tenants. All right there, Mr. Morrison. Is that Mr.? Oh, that's rude. Susie Morrison. Highly doubt that's a Mr. That has left so many tenants to watch thousands of dollars of back rent pile up, which their tenants will no doubt come calling for when the temporary pause on eviction ends. If this bill passes, landlords are going to find it even easier to push tenants out. No duh! That's the reason it's in there. That is the reason. And he's trying to sneak it in there. Damn Ford, sneaking it in there, trying to protect those landlords. Screw you! Tenants need you more than ever, and here you come, screwing them under the table. Along with a ban on disconnections and lockouts and a freeze on rent increases, the Ontario NDP has called for a rent subsidy of 80% for up to $2,500 for 4 months for tenants who have lost income due to the pandemic. During the pandemic, tenants have continued to receive notices of evictions and rent increases, yes. And we've seen that. There's been a blanket full of evictions just waiting, which would be very interesting to see what happens on the tail end of that. Also, if you're planning on renting a unit, I would suggest maybe not renting it for a few months after that happens, because that could get really, really messy. And worst case scenario, tenants, if you're getting completely screwed, contact my buddy, Mr. Harry Fines. He's got you covered. I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you guys learned some fun stuff today about landlords and tenants. Tomorrow, hopefully we get some more news related to our marketplace and we can kind of go back to our usual schedule. I love learning. I love connecting with you guys every morning as we do here on Toronto's #1 real estate podcast. Give us a thumbs up. Leave us a review. We are #1 on Google Podcasts. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Take care and keep it real.